Hi everybody, welcome to part three. This is where we left off last time in part two. Part one, we set up the layouts in AutoCAD, use the publish command to export PDFs of each of those unique layouts, and that gave us this AutoCAD folder where we can kind of turn everything off and on. And then in part two, we use the file script load files into stack, and that's how we brought all these in. And then I had to rotate them, put a white background in. We grouped them all into a layer group and set that to multiply. That's really important. If you don't do that, this will be opaque and you won't be able to see the colors down below here in the trees. So this last part, I just wanted to go through a few techniques that can save you some time. I will add links to a couple other tutorials that I did last fall. I think for rendering plans in Photoshop, when we used the Kiawah Island, the Inlet Cove project, for those of you who were here last year. And that just shows how you can do much more detailed freehand style techniques within Photoshop. What I want to show you here, and you can look at those for this exercise, since it's kind of a small scale, we want it to be quick, easy, still look good. I'm introducing some other techniques that basically use layer effects in order to accomplish some of the things that we did by hand. It's not as unique, it's not as interesting, but it does a pretty good job and it's a lot faster. And we can save those methods as styles and just apply them really quickly from one drawing to another. Okay, so what I want to do first is I'll start with the trees, do a couple of the trees, then maybe we'll look at the paving, the lawn area, and then talk about the water a little bit here too. And so one of the things we'll do, you can see I have the hatching in here too. When we start making selections, we may turn that, I will turn that off to make it easier to make selections, but we can also use the hatching as a way to provide some tone underneath what we're doing. So the first thing we want to do, we're going to work on this deciduous tree layer here, and I'll show you how to set up these layer effects to create a drop shadow, a fill color, a gradient, and overlay a texture if you want to. So let's start by, the first thing we have to do is make a selection, and that selection determines where we're going to fill and what the layer effect applies to. And in fact, excuse me, I'm going to pull this deciduous tree layer all the way up on top, because I want you to see what I'm filling it with. Otherwise, you won't be able to down below. So we're actually going to fill that with white and then use layer effects to add the color, the shading, and the tone to it. Now, the easiest way to make a selection in this case is to go up to the AutoCAD layers. If it's not open, open that up. Go down to the deciduous tree layer, make that active. I'm going to use my magic wand. And the key here is to uncheck sample all layers. We only want it to sample that layer. So it doesn't matter what else is showing on here, the hatching, everything else, doesn't matter. It's only going to sample deciduous tree layer, and that's what you have to make sure you have selected. You want it to be contiguous, otherwise it will select the white area inside the trees, which we don't want. We just want the boundary. So I'm going to click here, and if I click on my quick mask mode, I've already set this to show selected areas. So when I click on it once, it shows me that I've selected everything outside the trees, which is close, but not exactly. So if I go to the select menu and choose inverse, the selection really doesn't look any different other than you don't see it around the boundary. And now you can see it's selected everything inside the trees, from the edge of the trees all the way in. So it doesn't matter if there's branching in there, texture in there, it will just select everything, and that's what I want. So I'm going back to my regular selection mode. Now what I want to do is close this up, select the layer, which normally would be down here. I've just moved it up to show you how, so you can see that it's actually getting filled. You do not, I repeat, you do not want to fill on these layers. You never put anything else on these black and white layers that came from AutoCAD. So it's a good habit once you use it to make a selection, close it up, move to another layer, and then again you can use the edit, fill, and choose white, or I'm going to use the, I think it's control, backspace. There we go, control backspace, since white is my background color. And you can see, if I deselect it, it just filled that with white. Okay, and that's exactly what I want. I just need to have something filled in there. It can't be empty or the layer effects don't work. So now that that's filled and you can see it, I'm going to drag this back down into my color layer. And the reason that white disappears is because of this fact that the AutoCAD layers is on multiply. It just makes white transparent. But we're going to add some color to it and solve that problem. So select that layer, right click on it, and choose blending options. You can just double click on the icon for the layer and it will pop up the same dialog. It's interesting you choose blending options, which is here, but the dialog says layer style. So it's really, it's doing both things. So the first thing we're going to do, and I'm going to move this over here so you can see it, is check color overlay. And by checking it, it fills it with a gray. Now, in order to see what color I'm actually using, I'm going to click on the text color overlay, and then I can click on the little color chip here. And I'm going to pull this up into a yellow green. I like to keep the trees, the big trees, fairly light, this base color. So I'm going to come down in here, and you can see it just filled that. So again, it's up to you to figure out the color scheme. An analogous scheme with a range of greens, and then maybe a complementary color opposite the color wheel, which would be kind of pink or purple. Could work pretty well. But I'm going to start with this. And the nice thing about using the layer styles or the blending options is that I can always come back and change it on the fly. It's not fixed in stone. But for right now, I'm going to choose a fairly light green, not too strong a chroma. And let's just click OK. I'm going to leave the blending mode on normal for right now, because that way, if there are ornamental trees below, which like there are over here, this will stay completely opaque and it will cover that up and I don't have to worry about it. So that's giving me my color overlay. The next thing I'm going to do is add a drop shadow to it. And I'm going to click again on the text. And in this case, because I'm actually going to put a drop shadow and an inner shadow, they need to come from opposite directions to create the shading on the canopy. So I don't want to use a global light source. I'm going to uncheck that. And I'm going to say, okay, the source for this is coming from the upper right. And you can see if I extend it, you can see that it's coming out. Now that's a little bigger than I want. I just pulled it out there, and I'm going to bump the opacity up so you can see it a little bit more. So I don't really want it that big. I'm going to pull it back, something like that. A little bit to the lower right side. Again, this is totally editable, so I can come back and change this anytime I want to. But that looks pretty good. I need a little bit of contrast to make this pop out from what's going to be underneath of it later on. So I've got my color overlay, gave it the green, did my drop shadow just to give it that little 3D effect. The next thing I want to do is the inner shadow, and I'm going to select that. And again, because I'm working with that green range, I'm going to go back up to that kind of yellow green. And I can come out here and pick this. Oh, that's interesting. Didn't really pick that color, did it? So I know I'm up in this range here, and I want to pick something that's got a little chroma, but that's dark enough. So I'm going to start there. And also in this, I'm going to uncheck global light. And this I want coming from kind of the opposite direction. Now I start adding the distance in here, and I'll jump the opacity up as well. You can see that it's creating that inner shadow, which looks like that 3D shading that we use to make the trees look a little more three-dimensional. Now you can see the one limitation is because this tree is here and this tree is next to it, it's clipping that off. I think I mentioned this in class. If you wanted to solve that, maybe these smaller deciduous trees, you could select all them and move them to another layer. You could apply the same layer style to it once I create it, and then you won't worry about that clipping off. So that's why that's happening. This tree is affecting that tree. When they're out here independently, and you can see even the little rough edge there, it picks up the same rough edge there. So it's based on the style of symbol. I can also adjust this choke, kind of gives me a little banding. The size kind of fuzzes out that edge, which we want a little bit because, again, these are rounded shapes. They're not cylinders, so there is a gradient that happens. And then if you want to add some kind of special contour to it, you can, and you can also add some noise. So you can see, let me zoom in a little bit. You can see that that's adding some grain to it, gives it a little texture, so it's not just completely smooth and even. So just that alone gives it a little texture. I'm going to pull the choke back a little bit because I want it to make sure it stays kind of nice and rounded. And I could bump the opacity up if I feel like it needs to be a little more shaded, a little darker in there. So again, you can adjust that as you see fit based on the colors, but that creates kind of a nice, if I zoom back out, kind of a nice shaded pattern without actually having to draw anything on the trees. It's all done through these layer styles. Now, one of the things I've also done, I'll close this for right now, and I'm going to jump over to another file here. I don't know where it is. Well, I'll tell you what, let's create a new one. So I'm just going to do new, 150 pixels per inch. 4x3 is okay. I'm going to make a new layer. And one of the things I could do is I'm going to pick a color here. And that's down in my range. Maybe a little darker. And I'm going to choose my brush. Okay, I'm not sure why I lost my brushes, but I will load some brushes in, and I will make these available for you on the 251 Angel site. So presets and extras, I will give you these brushes I just set up. I think those of you who were freshmen last year here, it's a set of rendering brushes. I'll load those in, and one of the brushes down toward the bottom is art marker. Okay, and one of the things I need to change on that is to click on the brush panel, shape dynamics, and set this to direction. Okay, under shape dynamics, I set this to direction. Close that up. And what that's going to allow me to do is when I start making strokes, and this I am doing with my Cintiq pen on a tablet. I can't draw this straight with a mouse, so if you want to make textures like this, you know, you can put this texture on by hand if you want to, but I'm just putting a few of these strokes on here. I'm going to select an area, go to Edit, Define Pattern. I'll call it Marker, Streaks, Green. Okay, where's my drawing? There it is. So let's pull my effects back up here again. And I could also add a pattern overlay if I want. And I come in here. There's my pattern overlay. Let's put this on multiply. All right, I'm not sure why that's not showing up there very well. Let's scale it down and see if it changes any. Oh, link with layer. There we go. Well, I'm not sure why that's not showing up, so I'll have to look at that, and maybe I'll add an addendum to this. Let's see if I can pick a different one here. And because I actually should just lay this over top of that image, and I've got a style that I can apply it to. I'll show you how that works. So I'm not sure why that's working, but one of the things you can do, I will show you this. One of the things you can do is once you have this created, you can choose New Style. Excuse me. Large trees, check Include Layer Blending Options. Click OK and OK. So it's actually adding that into my style. So this is one I did before. So if I just pick this layer, click on that, it's going to add that style to the, if I click on this one, it's going to change it back. So you can save those. So with one click, you can fill the layer and set that up. So if I wanted to do that for the smaller trees, let's undo that back a bit. There we go. So if I want to do it for the smaller trees, I do the same process. Close up the color, open the AutoCAD layers, go to ornamental trees. I use my magic wand. Contiguous, no, not sample all layers. Click here, select, inverse, and I can check with my quick mask. You can see now I just have the red is what I have selected. Close up my AutoCAD layers, go to color, select the ornamental tree layer, and just so you can see that I'm doing, I'll go to edit, fill, white. Okay, so you won't see anything happen. I'm going to deselect everything. And now to show you how these textures or these styles work, I'm just going to click on ornamental trees, and it automatically just applied that texture to those trees. And you can see if I double click on the effects, it's got same inner shadow, just a different color, color overlay, pattern overlay. It's got a little texture to it, and drop shadow. So once you've done this and you hit new style, you can save those styles out, and it makes it really super fast to apply that to a layer and to create that shading consistently across the board. If you want to see how I can do this on one of the other, and over in the layers, if you want to get rid of those effects, they're still there. You can just hide them, fold them up a little bit so the layers aren't so big. Let's make another layer for lawn. Okay, so I'm going to go close this, back to AutoCAD, going to hardscape, which is right here. Now in this case, again, since it's only selecting on contiguous areas, in this case I'm not doing this kind of shrink wrap method. I actually need to select the areas where there is going to be lawn. So I will put this on add to selection and click here, 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 here. So all these areas that I know are lawn areas, just getting in with the magic wand. And it's just going right underneath those trees because it's ignoring every other layer except the one I have selected. So if that's selected, I can come over here and I actually have a lawn texture. Oops, sorry. Control Z that. I do not want to apply it to there. I forgot that I was still in that layer, and that's one thing you will do. So I'm going to go step backward. Remember, before I do this, I want to close the AutoCAD layers, go to color, pick lawn, then I can come up here and do lawn texture. Oh, sorry, I know why it's not working. So one thing I forgot, it's not working because, which is good because you'll do this too. What didn't I do? I didn't fill it with anything. Those layer effects have to work on some color. So what I need to do is go to edit, fill, white. And again, you won't see any difference on the screen, but you can see it in the preview right down here a little bit. And now lawn texture. And now you can see if I deselect this, you can see that that has been applied to it. So now if I look at kind of the anatomy of that, create it the same way. I have a color overlay, added the color, gradient overlay, actually put a light green to dark green gradient, which if we zoom out, you can see it's kind of light green here. It's applying it to the entire layer, entire area. So it's just a way to create a little variation in there. So it's a little bit lighter in the center and a little bit darker at the outsides. And this is the pattern overlay. I'm not sure why it wasn't working in the other one, but I'll have to give that another try. But you can see here it's that crosshatch pattern. it's just overlaid on top of the color. So you get a little bit of that grain. And if I pick this one, scale it up a bit, you can see I can actually kind of overlay those marker streaks just as part of this layer effect. So if you want that vertical marker streak effect, you can put that on there. If you want the kind of crosshatch, now this one's, the one that was in there was black and white. It works a little bit better. That's okay, but it works better if you kind of pick a color like I did and make a pattern out of it and then apply it. But it's kind of a really quick way to add that texture. Instead of stroking across this with your pen or your mouse all the way across, we just create a texture out of it, add it in as a pattern overlay, and if I bump the opacity up a little bit, you get a little more of the streaking, and it has kind of a nice effect without spending a lot of time to do that. Okay, now you could also take this, let's make another, I'm just going to make another layer, and since I already have this lawn filled in, instead of making another selection, I'm just going to control click on that, and that makes the selection out of what's in there. If I go to this layer, I can also just take my brush. Well, let's click on this. Let's go light. I'm going to Alt backspace, fill that. I'm going to click this, go with something a little darker. Get my brush. There's my lawn wash. You know, if I'm zoomed out, I can kind of go across this pretty quickly. I'm just using my pen on the screen now, so I'm kind of going across. I can highlight the outside a little bit more. I can switch colors to maybe a light blue. Add a little color mixing in there. Maybe a little light tan. Warm it up a little bit. So it's just kind of the idea of mixing kind of multiple colors in there that brings out the different colors if I add paving and things like that in there. So again, that's all just done by hand. I did a quick fill of the area with a light color, and then I'm just using the brush and the pen or the mouse to go in there and add that texture in. Because it's selected, it stays inside the boundaries. I could also deselect that, pick this layer, and just choose Lock Transparent Pixels. And the same thing happens. If, you know, I can paint anywhere in here, and it will only happen where there's already paint in there. Okay, so that's another method to kind of just manually paint that texture in instead of using the overlay method to do it. And it goes really pretty quick, especially since you can zoom out. And if you lock the pixels or keep it selected, you don't have to worry about going outside the boundaries, and it's really pretty quick. So you can use that same method for the paving. You basically go to the hardscape layer, select these paving areas. In here without the hatching, and then you can just fill those with a gray or a brown, add highlights over top of it. I think one of these, that's kind of what I did here. I just filled it with a basic gray. I'm not worried about absolutely perfect paving patterns. And then over here for the water, I basically just took a color and did this. Since this is 2 levels, well, actually that's not on your plan anyway, I guess, right? You've got the downside area. So all you really need to worry about is these planting beds, which I think you can just do with multiple colors if you have those areas, just to show it's different ground cover. And these trees, these really small shrubs, I'm not sure they really even need any shading because they're just so tiny you're not going to be able to see it. So ornamental trees, deciduous trees, if you want to pick some of these like this example and change the hue a little bit, you could take that same, copy them to a new layer. Let's see, maybe I could do this. Where am I? Okay, so I could take lasso tool. I'm going to go to deciduous trees. I'm going to select all those. I'm going to go to Layer, New, via Cut. So now those are on a separate layer, which means I can go in here and I can go to my color overlay. I can shift this up a little bit more in the green range, and I can go to my inner shadow, shift that up a bit in the green range. There we go, a little bit better. And I didn't really have to change anything. I just went in there and did an adjustment. So now these smaller trees stand out as a little bit different hue, creates that analogous scheme I mentioned at the beginning, instead of having all those exactly the same. So you could just go through wherever you see these trees, and in this case you'd have to go like around this one and back around that way. So you didn't take a piece out of the larger canopy. But if you want to do that, just create a new layer via cut, and then it'll have those layer styles applied to it, and just go and edit those layer styles to get the contrast that you want on that. So I will put a couple other links on Angel to the tutorials I did last year, as I think I mentioned. So if you want to see the detailed approach and kind of the hand method, if you want a refresher on that, those links will be there. I think it's a two-part tutorial on rendering plan graphics, more the kind of manual, traditional style using the pen and the Wacom tablet. But anyway, using these layer styles, layer effects, that gives you a quick way to kind of globally create a rendering without a lot of trouble and without a lot of time.